Thanks, Tim. Fatigue. It's been a journey, hey? Yeah. You're right in the midst of it. And if this topic can't be made fun, then God help the folk in finance, etc., right? So what I thought I'd do today is really turn today effectively into a tutorial. So get you working on your pitch for the November presentation day. So theory light, but enough framework there for you to be able to dust off. Once you get that, invariably the document, you'll post that document, and then you'll start thinking about this presentation. I'd encourage you to start thinking about it a little before that, but that's invariably the way you'll behave. So I guess a couple of handling rules for me. I've been doing this a little while. I've got some pretty definitive opinions, but I've got 2 ears and I do listen. I've got some experience in the room that has done a few more years on the clock than you folks have. So in folks like Ganilla and Wayne and Tim and Marin. So I'm going to get them to stretch challenge. I guess with this, for those of you that are in an engineering world as an example, there's no science to this stuff, but there's some really good foundation rigor behind it. So some common principles. And it's an expressive pursuit, I'd have to say. If you believe in the left brain, right brain stuff, which is all now being revisited and considered, not really terribly relevant, if you think about the people that are going to be judging you as individuals, that's a pretty good starting point. So challenge me if I say something that just disagrees completely with your own frame of reference, your experience in business, say so. I think that today is probably not a poker game. There's 4 competing teams, but just learn as much as you can. Stretch me, and you'll walk away. My intent for you today is walk away with a thumbnail of what some of the background and the structure for your presentation. So you'll get plenty of opportunities in the next couple of hours to do that. Have a story. Most of you at some point will have watched Shark Tank, right? Just for a moment or a clip, and whether you think it's reality or myth doesn't matter. But if you think about it, selling, most of you would not naturally consider yourself great salespeople, I'd suggest. When you turn up and they've submitted your document, why are they doing a presentation? Why don't they just say, deliver the document, then we'll make a judgment? What are they looking for?
Can't get the emotion out of the document.
Correct. The trouble with email, right? People so often misunderstand the tone of an email. So how do you convey the passion in a document? And then they start to see the alignment or the disconnection or the absence of a parallel in the team. Have they got one person out there presenting and all the other people looking thoroughly disconnected and disengaged? I go back to about 1998, and God love her, I'm married to a Dutch girl, so I spent a fair bit of time understanding the Teutonic mind. But this woman presented in exactly this sort of program, and she had this great Belgian waffle maker. She wanted to import into Australia. How many people do you reckon presented? 20 minutes. The rest of the team stood by looking as engaged as they were, 0. So part of what people are looking at is, how passionate are you? And passion should be authentic. Right? I'm not expecting any of you, this is not an acting class, I'm not expecting any of you to go through an epiphany in extroversion. That ain't going to happen, that's the bad news. But authentically believing in and having a message that you convey together is what people invest in. They don't invest in great ideas only. The necessary and sufficient element is people. They generally invest in people. That makes sense? So the reason behind, as I say, this story is the whole framework for today is helping you craft the elements of a story. Let me demystify storytelling. Again, I mentioned I'm married to a Dutch girl. Well, her mum lived in Holland during the war, and they hid Jews. That's what they did. I came home one night to my nice little place in Sydney with its little fireplace cranking away, and I'd been interstate, and I came home, and my mother-in-law was telling my eldest son, who was about 9 at the time, a story. And I walked in, and I just opened the door quietly, and I listened from the door, and I heard her telling this story about coming over the hill, and her mother had said, if you see smoke, run the other way because the Nazis will have found us. And I'm going, lady, you're scaring the hell out of my kid. I just want to go in and save my child, right? And I went, no, she's passing on a story. and it's something that the Asians do really, really well. They pass on the story. Fact, fiction, forget it. They pass on the story. Us Anglos, we're crap at it. We don't tend to invest the time, if that makes sense. So the point about the story is it's got nothing to do with management school or any of that stuff. It's not the domain of advertising. Storytelling is a societal, historical element of the way communities work. Cave paintings in the centre of Australia. It's telling a story, right? So my ambition with you today is to help you to get your head around that and start thinking about the story that you want to tell. And it absolutely has got to align and extend what you're putting in your document. Does that kind of make sense as a sort of a principled, a sort of a basic approach? Does anything that I've said so far resonate or not resonate with you folks and what you see day in, day out with work? Does the best idea always win? No. Okay, off and running. So I thought I'd step through just a quick download of experience-based data, principles that I spoke of before. So I'll go through the keys to impact presenting. I talk about impact presenting. You're trying to change the way people think or feel about your proposition. So on the day, and I gather the last thing we're doing this evening is picking the presenting sequence, right? So it's a bit like a job interview. So do you go first, second, third or fourth? And I've seen it run from front, back and middle. But the point is your strategy in some ways quite different. If you present first and you're going to be brave and contentious and you set the precedent, right, by definition. And then you're presenting last and they're flogged. The judges, I can tell you, the judges categorically are flogged by the time they get to the last presentation. It's like sitting through a 3-hour maths exam, which is, to me is the definition of torture. So to that extent, it is about making an impact. Then we're going to go through a quick planning model. During the course, you would have gone through psychometrics in some, did you touch on that? Johari Windows, Myers-Briggs, disc spin. Most of you would know what I'm talking about there. I'm going to give you a 5-minute take on that for trying to pitch and present. So I talk about audience styles and needs. I'll then go through a structuring piece with you and I've given you the answers, but I'll step you through that so you understand the context. Then I want to spend a few minutes talking about persuasion, because unless you can convince people that your offer, your proposition, the way you're going to improve the 100 is better than the other party, you'll wind up getting a well done. And then lastly, I wanted to touch briefly on visuals and delivery skills. Just a download of some experience over time. First one, you might want to make, I'll give you effectively a sentence to fill this out. The whole point about effect is you are trying to cause a change or cause an effect. You're trying to change the way people think about your proposition. The second principle is exchange. Right now, what am I getting in terms of exchange from you? Not much verbally, right? Because I'm talking at you. But I'm either getting eyeballs, or I'm getting people sleeping, or I'm getting people that are affirming and smiling. I'm getting people going, you are an absolute clown, right? But it's verbal and visual, right? Sorry, it's visual only. Ideas, energy and action. Quick exercise for you. Put your pens down if you would. Form a circle. And when I say so, I'd like you to put it and do exactly what I said. So I'd like you to put that circle on your chin. Go. That's a wonderfully, wonderfully anally retentive group. What did I say? What did I do? Cheek. How come so many of you moved to the chin? Interesting. Did anybody go to the... I didn't see any cheeks. That's almost statistically anomalous. Invariably you'll get the cheats that'll go... The point about it though is the mirror or the parallel between what you say and what people see. How many parents have we got in the room? Right, you know when your kid says, I didn't chop the tree down, the old George Washington thing, or I didn't do that. But you can see this cheeky roll of the lip, or you can see the palms sweating. So it's the correlation between what people see and what people hear. And this is where you get into the old paradigm of someone saying, oh, Ed's the better presenter, why don't we get him to talk? It's not about the best presenter. It's about what you did, what you care, how you operated as a team. So what that means from a teamwork standpoint is you get some people that are veritably crapping themselves. Some people absolutely are terrified of this stuff. And you won't believe at the age of 22 as a sales guy, it scared the crap out of me. One-on-one meetings. One day I was seeing an architect in Neutral Bay and I shook his hand. It was 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. And he walked away and he went, son, I'm not going to eat you. I was just, my hand was absolutely sweating. So the point is, if you are a team, then people will see you backing each other. Does that make sense? And that means the mechanics of how you actually manage your time frame so that people are participating and active is really important. And that's part of the tactics, that's part of the strategy of the whole exercise. The point about ideas, energy and actions is it is about the conveying of the ideas, but it is about the level of energy. I mean, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Many of you folks would have got up at 4:30 or 5. Somebody will have driven up the valley for the day and have just come back from 2 hours in a car to get here. So we can come in here and I can go, hi, presenting. Right? Give me a break. The judges will be the same, to be honest. Understanding, the whole idea of it is literal and lateral understanding. Think about it, you've got to convey an idea, but how do you put that in a term where people that process information completely differently? People have either got no level of interest or understanding. I'm not quite mathematically blind, I've run a decent sized business, but maths ain't my thing. And so you'll have somebody like that sitting on the judging panel. So understand what it is that connects with them. Purpose, real clarity of purpose about your presentation. You'll hear people talk about unique selling proposition or positioning, which is something that in infrastructure I work on every day because all they want to talk about is how many bloody kilometres of track and you know how many cubic metres of dirt and yada, 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 yada. And you go, mate, they're trying to move people. The business problem is to move people by a light rail system to activate an urban area or whatever it is. So be really clear about your proposition. And that applies to your document as well as your presentation. 2 people. You think about my task today, 23, 24 odd people in the room. You don't vote as an amorphous one. You vote individually, correct? I either connect with you and get into here and here, or I don't. So when you go away into your teams, you go, yeah, I got it, or no, I didn't get it. And so that fail for me is not having everybody get it. But it's the same on the day. You've got 5 individuals, different backgrounds, dynamic between the 5. And they're going to sit down at the end and they're going to judge. And they're going to go, yeah, I rated that a 3 or I rated that a 2 or I liked this or I didn't like that. And it's the sum of the parts is the point. That make sense? And lastly, awareness. If you find a judge sort of rubbing their eyes or cleaning their glasses or craning their neck around, when you're communicating with people, if you've got people on the page, you kind of get some affirmation, right? But if they're not with you, there's probably a reason. They can't see, they can't hear, you've got the thing out of focus, whatever it is. So minimise the moving parts, and if any of you have ever studied architecture, the whole Bauhaus design principles of simplicity, but to get to simplicity, you've got to go through complexity. That makes sense? So the old Winston Churchill thing of, I'm sorry, I can't speak for 3 minutes, I needed 3 weeks' notice. If you're going and you've got 20, what is it? Do you know off the top of your head, Tim or Mez? Your presentation window? Is it, how many? 30 minutes. So you've got 30 minutes. And you go, well, 30 minutes is a long time. 30 minutes is really short if you're absolutely clear about your message. Conversely, if you're talking tripe, it can seem like forever. So clarity of message is really critical. So there's just some quick downloads. Any quick questions or comments on anything? Call them guiding principles if you like. Any comments?
If you got, say, you mentioned losing the judges.
Yes.
Whatever, they're not concentrating. Mid-presentation, any
Yep.
tips of how to change
yeah.
it up and get
Yeah.
it back on board?
Probably one of the most difficult presenting audiences is trustees of super funds. And because the governance principle, a lot of them are often representatives of, as let's say, a union, and may not be terribly au fait with complex finance. And so that it's hard work for them. And they often will have a battery of 6 or 8 hours worth. And you go, well, the guy's asleep or the woman's asleep, what do? Do nothing, they'll stay asleep. Do you go and smack them? No. Change voice. Just even something as simple as this. Just move forward 2 metres. My point is that there's a tone and a tempo to presenting, and what's happened is if you lost them, and stop and ask a question and pause. I could wait for another minute and someone would talk, right? But it is about recognising that, and people go, because it will have happened many times before, and people go, nah, you don't interrupt Bill. Bill falls asleep. Up to you. Let's move on, folks. Let me step this through. So you are sitting down at your meeting, you've kind of dusted off your document, it's down to its final edition and it's gone off. What's the step through? So this is, for those of you that are sort of process hungry, this is kind of the starting point. So let me just step through and explain each of those 9, make some notes as you'd like. So if you are to put together your story, the starting point, the very beginning point is who the heck's in the audience. Now, the names of the judges have been public since the beginning of the project, I think. We are not in New York City, there are not 20 million people. These are people that are known around this city, right? And 2 degrees of separation, not 5 or 6 or 7, 2 degrees of separation. You know someone that has done business with those people, guaranteed. And if you don't, between the 5 of you, there's something seriously wrong. So start to find out about these people. Don't need to invade their personal space or their privacy, but find out what sort of people they are, what sort of organisation. Use PAC National or RTC, it doesn't matter. But if you look like Lend-Lease, if you look at any of those organisations, where did they start their career? Let's say it was a Lend-Lease. There's a particular way that culture operates. Get in, understand it, and then you can go, okay, understand what it is that drives that person. And again, you'd say, well, that's a generalisation. What we're trying to do is get down to specifics. So the point about the audience, a couple of points for you. You need to, I would suggest, to develop an expert understanding, not amateur. Need to research and develop an expert understanding, and what I would term, which we'll go on and look at in a minute, of their real needs. So really need an expert understanding of their real needs. And then the last part, which we're going to touch on, is what's their style? How does this thing work? Do they want lots of data, a little bit of data? Do they want a testimonial from someone? What is going to convince them? What's going to demonstrate? Are they visual? Are they kinesthetic? How do they actually process? That makes sense. So that's audience. Objective. Your presenting audience objective is arguably different. Might well be different to your presentation document. Let me make that clear. Your presentation objective on the day might be different to the stated objective of your submission document. Does that make sense? Because you're not trying to regurgitate the 30-page document. That's done. That's submitted. That's the given. So what is your objective for the presentation? Right? Third, persuasion. What are the persuasive elements? Is it a case study? Is it an image? I'll go through persuasion briefly in a moment. But how do we actually demonstrate to them, or is it a quote from someone? Is it an animation? What is it that's going to get them to go, great, I get it? Onto structure, and I'm going to step through a structure. 2 parts to structure, particularly in teams. One is to make it easy for the audience to follow. It's like guiding them by the hand, leading them through it. The other point is for you folks to make it easy for yourselves to deliver it. Let's say you decide that 5 people need to present. That requires a bit of choreography, doesn't it? A little bit of planning. So structure it from those 2 perspectives. Onto visuals. They talk about them as visual aids because they're a help. I've seen one of these programs in the early years, the guys got carried away with the whole idea of a monopoly board, and it was actually Northern Beach's transport solution. And so they went out and they got a map, and then they got an artist to go over it, and they went out and bought a whole bunch of little cars and buses. And they were presenting last, and the judges were flogged. And they just got the judges out of their seats, and they came down and they activated this whole thing with little toy cars and buses. And it told a great story. So as I say, you sit there and go, gee, that requires some work. Yeah, it requires some work. Do you want to win? Don't you want to win? It's all up for grabs. So there's the point about visuals, and I would suggest to you that using this method may not be the smartest approach, given the nature of the topic you're addressing. If you wind up being lazy and using PowerPoint, I think that's probably maybe not such a smart idea. And some of these folks won't be interested in your latest gimmickry with Prezi or whatever the heck the latest off-the-box software is. It's not a technology show. They're interested in heart and mind and what you think this city and the hunter could be. That's kind of in many ways much more what it's about. Read through, practice, practice, practice. And from the perspective thereof, does this achieve our objective? Onto the rehearsal. I've seen grown people who just sit there, big stakes pitches, and they say, I don't need to rehearse. Okay. Don't know whether Michael Hagan last year or Junior Pierce or any of these guys, they say it's bizarre in business. In sport, you train for 5 days to play one. And in business, we just don't train at all. So think about that. And I don't know that I've mentioned this, but in previous years I have done, and I'm happy to come up and run a rehearsal with you. You will have a mentor that will have a variety of experience and maybe not much. And so to the extent to which you want to use that, it's a resource, it's free, use it, don't use it. Then onto the delivery piece and then the debrief. This is an interesting one for the debrief because what's the context after you've done the presentation? I mean, in some ways, it's not like you're going to the bank. It's not like someone's going to give you a cheque and you're going to start a business, maybe not. But I would, when you sit down at that table, do the benefit of getting into the habit of being really candid with yourselves about what you nailed, because this is part of the growth piece for you. That's the process head to tail. Any questions on any of that? Observations? Why? Why this first? Why that last? Questions? Obviously can't contradict. No. Obviously, but in terms of emphasis, if you think about all the subtleties that have gone into a submission, what are the 1, 2, 3 messages? But also, how do you activate the difference between the document and the live people piece? So to that extent, it kind of leads to that. You wouldn't contradict. There's an old adage, a lot of government stuff, they say, well, you can't add any new information, but heck, this is not a BHP billet and pitch. It's, this is all, it's not theoretical, but pretty safe. Yep.
Ed, can I add something to that?
Sure, go.
When you come to do on that presentation, and Ed mentioned about looking up the judges and seeing what they do and seeing what their backgrounds are, when you've done your project and put it all together, there may be points and just words in that will spark one of the judges. And that may be something that they like, and that may be something in their background or something they're doing now, and maybe there's an emphasis on that part of it. So that's all I'm saying.
I mean, you make a great point. Most of you would have not been in the business world during the Sydney Olympic Games pitch, but you might remember the little girl, Tanya Blanco, who was the little kid that had her arms up. And if you go to exactly Wayne's point, all of the research on the AOC delegates was they were invariably grandparents, typically male, but invariably grandparents. And so, the heart appeal of a little girl, right? Really simple, not an accident, really, really simple piece of, frankly, engineering that went into that. That makes sense. So that's kind of the overarching planning piece.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
You just mentioned about the visuals, and I understand what you mean by avoiding death by PowerPoint.
Yeah, sure.
But for this sort of presentation, a few key images recommended? Saying like maybe 1 or 2, like
absolutely, and I'm the plumber with the leaky tap. Do we need 15 slides times 4 across 5 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again.
It's okay, PowerPoint, but just
To exactly your point, Olympic Village, great story. An Australian architect called Rod Sheard, who worked for a company called Blyvola. He was based in London. He designed 30 stadia in the last 5 years in Europe. He was out there. And I walked in and we had this like hour and a quarter, and architecture's like a big deal. And architects have a particular habitual way of presenting. It's all about the images. 85 images in his first 4-minute window. And I said, Rod, where are you from? He said, I'm from Blythe Hall. I said, no, where are you from? He said, I'm from London. I said, no, where are you from? He said, I was raised in, I think it was country Queensland. And I said, people in Australia don't want a bunch of foreigners coming in and doing this project for us. So where are you from? He said, I was raised in Western Queensland. I said, okay, there's a good story here. And it wasn't about the images, it was about his story, if that makes sense. And yes, there were images, but it wasn't 80. We got it down to about a dozen, but it enabled him to narrate. Does that make sense?
Yep, cool.
Other quick questions or comments, guys?
Is it a fair assumption, you know, in terms of like if you've provided enough context in your report, is it a fair assumption that that's covered? Or
Yeah,
do you need to
it's a great question because, again, empathise with the judge. Part-time, they're going to sit down and they will, I'm not suggesting they won't be diligent, they will have read it. I would think read it once, at the very least. Most of them will have gone over it a second time and marked it up. So this is not about the judges, but it is about their bandwidth, particularly if you're second, third or fourth. And you folks don't know how different each of the propositions are. Some of the elements will be pretty similar. So all of a sudden, I'm not really sure whether that was in the first, the second or the third. So the key elements, and it goes back to the question before, alignment between the document. It's got to look like they're from the same team. But if you think you're trying to regurgitate 100% of that information, I mean, it's the distillation piece. It's what's the crucial 2 or 3%, and how do you make that memorable when you put it with people? That kind of makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about telling the whole story. So just because it's in the document and you assume they've read it, you still got to tell the whole story in the presentation. So you don't need, but you can refer to the report and assume that they've read it and, you know, or suggest very nicely for them, might like to read the book, had it, you know, or something like that, but to engage them in that way. But no, you've got to tell your whole story.
Bang on. Yep. Okay. No more quick questions. We'll move on. Got plenty to cover. So that's effectively our agenda for the next hour and a bit. Okay. Going to get you to do a quick exercise at your tables. Right. Let me explain this. And so this is psychometrics in 15 minutes for dummies. Okay. So when I say psychometrics, it's the psychology of people's behaviour in the business world, predominantly in the business world. So you might have heard of DISC, spin, LSI, Herman brain dominance, Myers-Briggs, yada, yada, yada. There's 1,000 instruments like that. The main point, so what I'd ask you to do firstly is, on the piece of paper you've got there, how in business, this is for yourself. On that vertical, dominant and easygoing are opposites. We could have semantic debate about that, but dominant and easygoing are opposites. Just put where you sit there on that vertical. Are you highly dominant or do you think you're pretty easygoing? Just quick exercise, don't think about it too much. Then on the horizontal, are you a highly controlled person or are you more spontaneous? Again, don't think about it too much, just plot it. What I'd like you to then do is plot the intersection. So let's say you rated yourself there and here, that means the intersection's there. And I'm the maths moron, so if I can figure that, I think most of you can, right? So plot yourself as to which section you fit in. Has everybody got a dot sitting in one of those 4 quadrants? Anyone, have I lost anybody? Okay. So, just show of hands, how many have we got in this quadrant? Just hands up. No one in that quadrant. That's interesting. Okay, we'll come back to the second. What about in this quadrant? Just hands up straight. Do we have anybody about here? Okay. Yep. Down here, this quadrant. Okay. And then down here. Just for these folks, you really have to put your hand right up straight. I'll explain why in a minute. That's all right. Okay. This is not scientific, okay? The whole point about this is to have the conversation we're about to have now. So frankly, which box you fit in does not matter. Doesn't pass the science test, self-assessment, yada, yada, yada. So let me talk about these folks. So what we're talking about here is someone that is highly spontaneous but dominant. So they're pretty hard to pick, opinionated, and then quite strong at defending it. My good buddy Alan Jones, he's not my good buddy, but Alan Jones, any of the topical speakers, opinion shapers and leaders, sort of folks that have got, you know, millions and millions of social followers and all that sort of stuff. So people that are contentious but are strong promoters of their message, if that makes sense. And you would find, just as an example, you'd find them, you know, a lot of them are personality, media, marketing, celebrity sort of folks. But you'll find them, PJ Keating, Paul Keating is a great example of that. You know, you would have to say certainly very strong and affirmative in his own view, but often pretty hard to pick, if that makes sense, in terms of taking a position but happy to argue it. What I'm going to do is give you a description, then we'll come back and say, so if you've got one of those people, how do they process information? How do you connect with them? So over here, you've got somebody that's highly dominant, has to have their way, but they're very sort of clinical and controlled. It's, you know, lots of roles, but classic CEO. The old school project director, does everybody know what I'm talking about here? Yeah. Got flogged in the site sheds in the 1960s. Everyone understand? Yep. And so impatient, answer questions yes, no, you know, move pretty quickly, don't need lots of data and information to make a decision, but you know, in many ways not very efficient in terms of the way they use their time often, but they refer to them as direct or driver. Get down here, you've got the controlled and easygoing. So this is someone that goes through, picks the right process, establishes the right data, steps through it, sorts, prioritises, weights, we'll do criteria, multi-criteria analysis and all that sort of stuff, and then wind up an outcome. Awesome. I don't like that answer. I used the perfectly acceptable Australian standard process. So to that extent, they sit there and go, I'm not going to die in a ditch about it. I'll find a new process, you want a different data set, no problem. But it's not, you know, they're not sitting there, you know, dying on a vine to support it. And then this one is interesting because if you think about it, the fact that people are easygoing, does that make them weak? No. The point about easygoing is they go, well, that's my view. You don't agree with me? I mean, it's not like we've got a postal ballot going on currently, right? Right? I mean, it airs exactly that point. You sort of go, some people sort of go, you know, it's my view, I really don't want to get in a fist fight about it, let's just move on. So the easygoing and the spontaneous piece is being seen to be difficult to read or unpredictable. And I was doing this with what used to be called, what is now Ausgrid, Was Energy Australia, 10 years ago. And the general manager said, Ed, just a minute. He said, they're all the people we let go before Christmas. So if you think about any of the old stereotypes about the public sector, and I do use the term old and I do use the term stereotypes, the interesting thing is that invariably some of these people are absolutely pivotal to whatever you're trying to do in business. I do a lot of work with Transport New South Wales, classic example. You walk in there and buried somewhere inside the signalling branch is someone that's exactly like that. They hold the keys. So, we'll talk about now how do you work with these people. Why do we call them amiable? Just treat them like civil, decent, respectable human beings. Just stop and take the time to get to know what goes on in their world. Quick story, Sydney Water a couple of years ago, a guy called Charles Rotier, terrific bloke, and he'd walk around and I'd see him sitting on Wayne's desk showing him photos and I'd go, what's going on? And he'd say, hey Wayne, how are you? And Wayne would say, hello Charles, how are you? And he'd say, what have you been up to? And Wayne would say, blah, 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 blah. And he said, and Wayne would say, Charles, haven't you been overseas? I said, yeah. He said, I was driving MGs around the Amalfi Coast. And it just takes some time to construct a relationship. And nothing untoward, but at the end of the day, it sits there and goes, is that a guy that's actually going to demonstrate and show me a bit of respect? Really, really simple. The other part of it is not to be dismissive of their role, function and contribution. They're often people that are not, they're not paying attention or drawing attention to themselves. I'll move on. The expressive, you never ignore them. If they're an opinion shaper and leader, get off a date, go and engage them, find out what they want, and then make sure you include, probably lead with it. Otherwise, they'll hijack the hell out of your presentation. Has everybody heard or seen one of those folks? But just don't ignore them. You're just going to get slaughtered. The driver. These two are actually, in many ways, a little bit simplistic, but quite easy. The driver is incredibly impatient. So start with the recommendation. What do you want from me? Why is it going to improve my lot? And what do you need me to authorise, and what's an outcome? Keep it really simple. These folks, if you go to them and say, here's what I want, they say, well, hey, hang on, what are we talking about? So you've got to, they talk about deductive and inductive logic. Here you need to build the story and say, look, here is the situation as it currently looks. Here's the problem. Here are a couple of options that we've explored, and here's the way they rank. So maybe we want to think about deciding A or B, as opposed to these folk that by the time you get to the process, you've lost these guys and gals. So the point about this is you are going to have 4 judges, and I don't know any of them, but what I can tell you is that if you think about the nature of this city and a lot of the industry typically, you're probably going to have, I would think at least, that's engineering land. Right, that's design engineering, that's operational engineering, if that makes sense. Over here, any sort of CEO, mining, project director sort of roles. And expressives, like, maybe. Some of you creative folk. This place has got a pretty good creative DNA these days. So the point about it is to plot, the job is to plot the judges. So what I'd encourage you to do now, just 5 minutes, just try and plot the judges. I'll give you, it's a good task. Okay. So if I can anticipate a couple of quick questions, there's obviously more work for you guys to do there. You then sit there and you go, well, hang on, I've got 4 polar different types of people.
Yes.
What the heck do I do? So the first part is, if you think, let's say you had each 4 corners of the quadrant, what the heck do I do? You've got one here, one there, one there, one there. There's a common, back to the point before about regurgitating. So don't presume that everyone remembers the key points out of your document. So that's the first part. The second part is you, in a real world, you do a heat or a power map based of the people and sit there and go, how are these people going to make decisions? Is it 1 vote per person? Which in this case it largely will be. But you'll have people influencing. There'll be somebody strong in there, and I don't know them, and they will influence or polarise people one way or t'other. That's the way free enterprise in the world works. So the point about it is, what sort of, when we get onto persuasion, what persuasive components am I going to be using? And if you think about the nature of, this is not a Boston Consulting Group business case. This is a largely emotional, aspirational thinking piece, correct? It's dreaming. So to that extent, you think about it and you go, but by definition, dreams are vapour. So somewhere in there, how are you going to substantiate or convince people, maybe with either some hard facts, or maybe they're not facts, but maybe some hard numbers that are bogus, because you'll make numbers up, right? So somewhere in there is the balance between selling a dream and enough substance, because you're going to have people, you're absolutely going to have people down here that want hard justification. And if you think about the nature of the people in there, you'll have a couple of CEOs. Peter, I'll talk about Peter Cock and Tony Kate for 2 seconds. Peter Cock is a really, really interesting guy. You could overlook, he's a quietish man, you could overlook and underestimate him at your peril every day. My sense is I talk about the flywheel. Everyone understands what a flywheel is? Super bright people that have got a flywheel that means they don't say very much. Beware the quiet ones. They often know something. Does that make sense? So Peter's a quiet, unassuming man, but he's got a wicked sense of humour, really has. Conversely, Tony, in many ways, ex-industrial, CEO type of guy. Backslapping. Again, you could write Tony off as a dill. You could easily write Tony off as a dill. You'd be mad to. So what you've got is in some ways, you've got, Peter Cock would probably, I would think, probably fit somewhere between there, but in the instance of having to make a hard decision, just shoot you right between the eyes. There would be no emotion in it. Similarly with Tony, I would think that Tony's actually got quite a bit of this in him. I would think that Tony's probably up here somewhere. But the point about it is to do your research. LinkedIn is a wonderful tool. This is Newcastle, 2 degrees of separation. Get on your bike and find out about these people. And let me tell you that if you don't, you're guessing. That make sense? Alrighty. So that's a bit of work in progress. Okay, on to the next one. Don't forget to turn off your phone. Have backup for PowerPoint. It's all. This is life in action. Okay, let me step you through this. This is a concept I think you'll find pretty easy. The whole premise, if you forget selling, just think about your own purchasing decisions. Think about one of the most stupid decisions that you will ever make. The suburb in which you choose to live. It is ridiculous because everyone starts talking about, well, it's a rational decision. The rent was da-da-da-da-da-da, and the size of the building, 3 bedroom, da-da-da-da, and you go, yep, okay. But on Saturday morning, when I go down there with my partner and my kids and my friends or family, what sort of crew do I want to be around? And that has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with that. So there are emotional drivers. And then you go, a bit more comfortable with a white Anglo crew. Love multiculturalism. So let me just explain these 3 and then we'll just talk about an example. So we talk about rational or head. Let me give you a couple of these and just choose to write down them. Stuff that you folks will deal with every day. Time, price, quality versus specification, ISO, Australian standard. Does it or doesn't meet the spec? So 2 people will look at that and go, it does or it doesn't. Complete objectivity, right? Does that make sense? The next one, emotional. Do I like that person? Or don't I like that person? How do they make me look from an ego standpoint? Is it going to advance my career? Is it going to help my ambitions? When I'm around them, do I fear? Do I feel a sense of fear being around them? So all of those emotional drivers, and they're the matters of the heart. Over here, this is all the stuff we don't and not allowed to talk about. It's illegal. Race, religion, gender, sexual preference, age, nationalism, political preference, all of the prejudices. I talk about perception, but prejudices. So if we keep going, in Sydney, it's really, really well known that if you want to be seen around town as a gun lawyer, you live in 1 or 2 suburbs. It's likely Vaucluse or Mossman. It's kind of really simple. And that's all over here. And as I say, if you think about it, you go, well, no, I live in a very sensible part of town. And you'll convince yourself that it's all about this. No. You'll have a set of criteria there, a couple of criteria there, and it's the horrible, horrible, ugly truth. But if you look yourself in the mirror, you've got prejudices driving your behaviour. And if you cast that from yourself, a simple example. I came back from overseas. My wife had been a champion. I'd been travelling 3 weeks a month in Asia for 5 years. She'd had both of our kids up there. We'd had both our kids up there. And we came back and she needed a car. We needed a car. And I thought, you know what? Never buy new cars, but buy a new car. But the first thing I decided was it was a gift. This sounds really male, chauvinist, patronising. My wife makes as much money as I do. We do everything 50-50, except for this case, because little lady doesn't understand cars. But I'm joking. I'm joking. But I thought it's a gift. So then I went back and, leasing budget, colour, resale, right? It's all over here. Resale, airbags, safety, right? You get the drift? Engine size, economy. So over here sits stuff like brand. And over here sits the ugly truth around country of manufacture. Did I say I worked for an American company for 15 years? The Americans can't make anything. Is that a prejudice or a fact? It's a straight prejudice, isn't it? So imagine my surprise when the Honda, I'd owned 3 Hondas, when the car sales guy, when I was ringing him grumpy that the car was late, And I said, where's the car been? He said, in the Panama Canal. I said, mate, I lived in Asia for 5 years. Can you explain to me why a car coming from Japan to Australia would have gone via the Panama Canal? And then I heard those famous words, oh, Mr. Rowley, you don't understand. That car's built in our state-of-the-art plant. I think it's in Ohio, but it had been chronicled. It was Honda's plant in America. And so when it was delivered, it was a piece of American trash. So what was I looking for? Faults? Do you know what its 2 faults were? It had a tinny muffler, it just sounded rubbish. And then the boot trim didn't fit. At its 3-year anniversary, gone. It was self-evident, and it sounds so silly, doesn't it? It was a perfectly good car. But that's the way prejudices play out. And I can tell you right now, in business, and I do this with professional consulting firms, and they sit there, one in particular in Sydney, and they've gone from being a 45-year-old white male company, and their average age would be maybe 30, 31. There is not a nationality they don't have good bandwidth on. I mean, literally, you name it. Gender split probably 40%. And you go, and I said to one of them, I said, there's a government agency here that wants women of a particular DNA, and they don't want any people from the Middle East. And that, as I say, as an Australian, I find that a thoroughly repulsive position. But you look around and you start to observe that as fact. So I guess my point is, if you start unpacking from the judge's perspective, what is the economic rationale argument here? What are the facts? How have you considered demographic shifts? So what is the backbone argument? What is your level of passion and inspiration and aspiration about what the hunter could be? And then what does that do in terms of the political messages? So literally the political messages, but what is it going to do culturally? How is that going to impact the culture and the future for the next generations of the hunter? So if you sat down and looked and did this 5 times, once for each judge, and just went 1 or 2 rational, emotional, and 1 or 2 political, you'll start to see some outliers, but you'll start to see some common threads. And I would suggest to you that if you did that like now, then that would largely help you inform your strategic positioning of your bid or your offer. So this is where an example of where this stuff's all relevant for your submission document as much as your presentation. Quick questions or comments on that? I'll move pretty quickly, but I'll just to get the concept. Does it seem far-fetched? Where do you reckon I buy cars from these days? Japan and Germany, only 2 countries in the world that know how to make a car. Some of you will have that belief set, so it's just a matter of unpacking it and understanding it. So you can try and sell me a Spanish car all day long. Quick questions? Otherwise, keep moving. So the point is that next exercise is if you want to take, what do we got? Time check?
Do you have a Japanese car or a German car?
No, Japanese, Mazda. Yep. I'm really not a car guy. It kind of goes to it, doesn't it?
Probably wouldn't break then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Do you want to take 5 minutes and just think, don't try and do it for each of the 5 judges, just think about for your proposition, what are 2 or 3 of the rational drivers you're trying to deliver? Might be GDP growth, might be export trade, it might be capital inflows, could be a lot of things. Emotionally, what are you trying to do in this city and in the hunter? Emotionally and politically. Just 5 minutes and just jot down a couple. Just want you to start socialising that.
Do you want me to scroll?
So it's on the right-hand side of that big sheet I gave you. Just a couple of observations for you. These ones just about always sit in the RFP. They're facts, they're stats, they're generally pretty available. As I think I said to someone a moment ago, if on Christmas Eve I came up to a stranger and said, so mate, how much money did you earn last year? He'd go, on your bike. But if I went to my brother-in-law and said, hey mate, did you have a good year last year? How much did you earn? Because we've got a long-standing relationship. So this is almost relationally derived. So if, back to repeat clientele, good for business, right? So at that point, you're just playing the punter's game and you're reading the RFP and that's about it.
What's the RFP, sorry?
Sorry, RFP is a request for proposal. So a tendering process whereby you've picked up the document, you've never been to their site, you don't know the company, you don't know who they are, what they do. Why the heck would you invest a minute of your time in a business you know nothing about? Happens every day in construction. As I say, go and give somebody that sends money to you, give them some free love. Go to a client that already sends you money and give them an extra 5 hours instead of bidding for a piece of work you know nothing about. So understand that stuff, but where you really, when you start to develop the relationships, you'll start to be able to figure this stuff out, if that makes sense. So the idea is, it's almost, if this understanding is the end game, these are the drivers of the judges, are arguably the people of Newcastle and the Hunter. If these are their drivers, what are their political aspirations or needs? What are their emotional needs and aspirations? What are their rational needs? Jobs, GDP growth, yada, 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 investment flows. Then how is your proposition going to deliver that? Does that make sense? Questions or comments? Otherwise we'll move on.
Where do you start with your pitch? Do you sort of focus on the political needs and then tone emotional and rational, or?
It's probably not that linear, Jackie. I'd like to be able to give you a clean, simple answer. But as long as, if you fold back the previous slide, so if you go back to understanding these individuals and their drivers, which is the one we've just done, then that kind of will give you a clue. But if you think about your overarching strategic position or whatever your thematic, lift pitch, whatever the heck it is, then it'll be a blend of those. I would argue though that if there were a bias, if you stand up there and say, look, we tick all of this stuff better than anybody else, it probably lies in those two. And these are kind of either hit or miss. But appealing to the common emotional driver, and I think there are some pretty obvious right now, humble view, political aspirations of this region. I think there are probably 2 or 3 you could just about bet the house on. And I think there are also probably 2 or 3 emotional drivers which you could pretty much bet the house on. So it's a matter of distilling those down, getting the essence of that. And then, so why is what we're suggesting going to do a better job of that than the other 3 teams? That's the game. Questions or comments? And this works every day in business. So you go into a meeting, PCG, whoops, I'll go back the other way. You go into a meeting and you see people behaving. They're getting grumpy because they're down here and you just told them what the answer is and they say, whoa, what's going on? And that's when they start disengaging, they start misbehaving, they get grumpy, they throw their toys out of the pram. And if you don't tend to pick up on these clues and you keep coming back and keep delivering the same stuff, don't expect them to engage or want you to come back. Does that make sense? And the bottom line is for you and your jobs, you sit there and you go, what is this organisation about? What happens here? Am I up for that? Am I okay with a workplace that treats people like trash? Right? Well, these are the sort of decisions of courage that as leaders I would encourage you to make. Because you can shape that stuff, can't you? You see someone harassing someone because of their race or religion, their gender, their age, whatever. You can either walk on by or you can take a stance on it, can't you? Okay, let's get on to the structuring piece and then okay, let me step through this. I'll probably take about 10 minutes to step through this, and then my intention is for you to leave you 15 minutes to start planning this relative to your presentation. So, I'm going to go through this a number of times. Numbering system is all out of kilter. I'll come back to that in a second. Merrin, do you know, can I draw on this board? It is a regular whiteboard. This is not a whiteboard. This is not a whiteboard. Thank you. Thank you. Gold star. Yeah, I might do it on that, guys. Yep. Thanks, man. I don't need the cable.
There we go, Tony.
Yeah.
Do not start writing.
Yeah.
This is our last session, Andy.
Yeah.
You can draw on it.
Yeah. Just knock yourself out, you reckon? Yeah. I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll explain these and then I'll do the sequencing. So I'm just going to step through each of these. So the first point, for the first 15, 30 seconds, no one is listening to anything you say. They're tuning in. Are they interested? Do they want to be here? Do they have a strong proposition? They're listening for this stuff. right? So it's a bit like if you ski, that first turn off a vertical surface, that first turn is critical. So you need to make a clean start. And if you haven't rehearsed, and you're not clear about your sequence, you're not clear about your first 15 or 20 words, you'll meander and mumble. That's the reality. So introduction, and it might be something as simple as good afternoon, good morning, thank you. But just having that to the point where you start off with a clean turn, if you like. Then you move on to creative. What was my creative today? At the beginning. Really, guys? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Right, part of it was noisy, part of, what the hell is the guy showing us people chasing some guy and shooting bullets at him for? The point about the creative is people without any context at all need to understand what the heck they're there for and what you're about, if that makes sense. So go Shark Tank. Most of them wind up with a demonstration, correct? Or some sort of depiction or demonstration of what it is they're about. So this is the objective. So I'll give you an example in a moment too. So what is the objective today? Remember what we said about the objective. What's your objective, but what's the objective for the judges? Right, my objective today is to convince you that we've got the best proposition. Fantastic, that's pretty damn obvious. What are you trying to do with or for me as the judge? So maybe your objective might hinge around, look, we're presuming you've read the document. What we thought we'd do today is blah for you, the judge, or judges. Does that make sense? So you need to think about how you couch your objective in language that's relevant for the judge. Then we break it down to agendas 1, agendas 2 and agendas 3. And invariably most of you say, well, why do you have 3 agendas? Because if you can't break it down to 3 agendas, your critical thinking needs some work. Right? You've got a 30-page document, you've been working on this for 6 or 7 weeks, you will have had many, many conversations. You need to be able to distill it down into bite-sized pieces. And we are educated, ABC, 1, 2, 3, etc., etc. They're bite-sized and manageable bite sizes. So 3 agendas. So they're if you like, the logic pieces. Here's what we're going to cover first, second and third. Then you've got the step through sitting underneath each of those. So you have, the detail under that, the detail under that and the detail under that. Then you have a summary. So you've got summary 1, summary 2, summary 3. And that is the synopsis. And then lastly, you've got a conclusion and next steps. So let me give you a quick example and then I'm going to show you how you write it, because your delivery and your writing method are different. That makes sense? Thank you. Had a phone call Sunday week ago at about 5 p.m. We've been waiting, my wife and I have been waiting on for about 30 years. I'd like to tell you about the birth of my first grandchild. Thought I'd talk to you about my son and his partner. Thought I'd talk to you about the birth of the grandchild and why that's game-changing. So, my son, 28 years old, left school in year 10, did the professional surf circuit, travelled the world. Pretty loose kid, to be honest. Tragic relationships, but wound up meeting a beaut girl from Newport in Sydney about 3 years ago, and they now live in Bali and both got businesses up there. So they're pretty happy, we like her. They got engaged in December up in Bali when we were there, and when they came back down to Sydney about a month later and found out that she was pregnant, so the wedding got postponed pretty quickly. So a little baby girl, Ra, R-A, Ra Riley, was born last Sunday week. And she's an absolute champ. For my wife and I, we thought we'd have a few more years before we were grandparents, and our life is just about to change. So, a son that maybe hadn't followed the formula, uni and all that sort of jazz. We've now got a little baby granddaughter, and I think that, as I say, it's our life's changed for some time. I think I'm going to have to do a lot of work on revisiting parenting in 2017. So that's the way you might use it to deliver. That makes sense? So what you've got going on here is a beginning, beginning, a middle, and an end. And what we're trying to do is make it really, really easy for the audience to stay with our message, if that makes sense. Quick questions or comments on the logic, logic of the flow. Before I start talking about...
Yeah, so would it matter if you had 4 agendas? Smaller?
No problem.
Okay.
Have a good reason for it.
Yeah.
And as an example, I used that agenda, but as an example for you folks, there's probably something there around, the agendas could be as follows. Current and traditional observations about the hunter. Changes. What's going on in the world scale that's relevant and how our proposition addresses it. That's kind of a logic. They talk about what's the situation, what's the complication, what's the resolution. So there's lots of ways of tackling it. Past, present, future. But that's the chess piece. That's the chess piece of trying to structure your presentation. And as I say, we use this, the Olympic Stadium bid with multiplex was 10,000 pages. We use this method to structure it. But volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. Other quick questions or comments? And really what sits in there are a series of bullet points that guide your conversation.
Should you come out and state your agenda in that step and then break down the...
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's, I think what I said was, that was when I talked about the news and my granddaughter, and there I talked about my son and his partner, the child, and the impact. So yeah, you actually explain, because people sit there, you've all sat in meetings where you go, has this meeting actually started? Or worse still, 3 hours later, what was that about? And we're all dreadful consumers of bad meetings, aren't we? We're polite. Who in the last week has got up and walked out of a meeting because it's been a waste of time? We're absolutely Pavlovian conditioned, aren't we? No, don't do that. Last time I did that, the project director for Parramatta Light Rail rang me and said, are you okay? And I said, I was wasting your money. So I got up, just 15 people got up, politely excused myself and walked out. So yeah, let me explain the structuring piece now, because those numbers are wrong. So you write it and plan it differently the way you deliver it. So what I just did was the delivery piece. So it goes like that, then down, 1, 2, 3, and then summary, 1, 2, 3, and then across. So your starting point is actually not on that page. Your starting point is your audience research, right? So what is the styles and what are the needs and drivers? And then you go, okay, so first point is, number 1 is, what is my objective? How do I want to articulate my objective? That's number 1. Surprise, surprise, start with the end in mind. What is my conclusion? That's the second piece. Does that make sense? What's my proposition or subject? And what's the outcome I want to conclude with? And if that's then the case, then you go, okay, so what's going to get me from that proposition or topic to that conclusion? So that's where you decide on your agendas. That's why I say it's the strategic piece. And then you fill each of those out. And each of these, I think I said probably 3 words in each of those. So that's a pretty crisp summary. The point about these are, if you think about the very first word you say in section 1, it might be 25 minutes or 18 minutes by the time you get to that. They've forgotten that. So what was the main point, the main point, the main point, the conclusion? Quick questions or comments on that? Okay, what I would suggest is, just for the moment, take a crack at 1, 2, and 3. So just try and get your subject, your conclusion, and your 3 agenda items out. That'll be good use of 5 minutes. So most of you will have sort of taken a stab at the objective, have gotten close to conclusion, start to think about that. Then you pick each of those 3 out and you populate the detail underneath of those. Put your opening comments and your creative in there. The last thing you do is your creative, because you're not being paid to be stand-up comedians. You're not being paid to be funny. So you've got a business message there without the creative. Some suggestions for you. Let's say you've got 5 people in your team. There are a couple of sort of typicals. Someone does all of the intro and says, because this front piece here is probably only about 3 minutes. Hi, how are you? We're really funny people. Here's our purpose or objective today, what we'd like to achieve. We're going to cover this, then that, and then that. And then someone might say, look, I'm now going to hand across to Bill, who's going to run the next piece, and Janice, and then, so that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, and then maybe that's 5, if that makes sense. I guess the other one that I'd leave you with is, don't be afraid, but it requires rehearsal to time manage, where you might have a host. So someone might lead a topic, but then actually get people to dive in. The time management issue is generally a real challenge, if that makes sense. The last point I'd make is, these look like they're evenly weighted. There's no reason they have to be. So let's say your first one was current observations around the hunter, which might be a download of BIS shrapnel data. Tip for you, 2 minutes. Keep it short, sharp and crisp if you were to do that, because you're going to bore people with stats. Then you might go on and say, so what was the underlying logic or rationale behind our offer? And that might be, say, 10 minutes. But you might bang on here for 15 or 18 minutes about 5 of the really big outcomes that we're going to deliver for the hunter. So it's a fluid process, but I'd encourage you to think about where you want the bias to be. And the bias should be where you think the judges might want the bias to be. They're going to want to hear lots of data, BIS shrapnel or stuff? No. Ideas, passion, creativity, interpretation, benefits for the hunter. Does that make sense?
Question, the project question, it talks about now being in 2037.
Yep, so transport, yep.
Yeah. How should we be presenting to the judges like it's 2017 and this is our vision, or like it is 2037 and looking back?
I'm not sure that you need to go to the trouble of fashion for 2037. My sense is, though, but being in the brief is probably pretty important. My guess is, to answer your question, you could probably go either way. I've got a view that I'd probably, because unless you're in the moment of 2037, then it's artificial. I mean, by definition, it is artificial, but you're not really playing to the brief. Would be my guess if you did it in 2017. Other quick questions, Wayne?
Can I just say, just to reiterate, that make sure you do read the question and what it asks you to do. So read it again if you've got any misunderstanding of what it should.
Which I'll decode as if I might have interpreted that differently, incorrectly. I got it wrong, and I've got vociferous nodding from the back. Yes, thanks, Wayne. Got anything else you'd like me to do right?
We can't start again, but anyway.
No. Yeah, it's an hour and a half. They won't get it back. Other quick questions and comments about the structured planning and what's ahead of you. Final piece, time. I don't know why, for some reason, we do the final presentation after months of rehearsals and we're running at 22 minutes. There's like a time warp. And the guys go in and they do it. And for some reason it takes 30 minutes. I don't know, inside the presenting room the clock runs differently. I don't get it. So plan to run at about 80% of your time. So if you've got 30 minutes, you've got to be done dusted for about 24, 25 minutes. Q&A, right? There's a whole Q&A piece. And that's not not for coverage now. But just try to achieve less, because what it will force you to do is to cut the fluff out, right? If you had to pay for every word, is a good way to think about it. Economy of words. You had to pay for every word. What really matters? The main thing I'd like to finish off talking about is persuasion, if that's okay. I think that so at this point now, you've done your analysis of your audience, you've gone and structured you understand your objective, you've structured your argument, and then how the heck do you persuade people? So, it's not a very good prop, but it'll do. This is better. I like it over here. So, imagine this is a pistol, handgun. I come up and hold it to Mel's head. Now you might think that that's reasonably persuasive. Mal has to make a few decisions. First question, is it a real gun? Is it loaded? Does Ed know how to use a gun? These are a lot of questions Mal's got to answer. And then if yes is the answer to all of those things, is there a chance that if Ed pulls the trigger, that the bullet will miss the top of Mal's skull and go somewhere else? The proposition is that the only persuasion is self-persuasion. I can't force Mal to do anything. He needs to convince himself that that is a high level of probability that he's going to die. Once he makes that decision, he might well agree to whatever my demands are. You cannot force anybody to do anything. Think about it. But what you can do is get them to a position where they see a set of facts, their reality, that actually has them do whatever it is you're suggesting. So you can put a strong case in front of people that has got, again, going back to the rational, emotional, political. If you don't get that combination right, it might be the best example in the world. Right? So if you think about these drivers here, you can have a great rational argument, but if you don't appeal or relate to them in the way they are emotionally driven and politically driven, and if we keep going, if you go back to this one, let's think about the sorts of things that are likely to convince this person. Not lots of information. Little bits of the right stuff. Bang, bang, got it. That's the return on investment or whatever it is, one or two key data. These folks, more of the right set of data and the right process. You might have the wrong process with the right data set, boom, boom. These people over here, if you think about what's likely to convince them, engagement. It's not actually that hard. And over here, what's likely to engage these people? Their own opinion. Someone that asks them questions and listens, and then asks more questions about, oh, wise one. Does that make sense? So let's spend a few minutes just talking about the elements of persuasion. And you'll find in life, people are in many ways quite, you'd think that the media and political lobbyists are all over this. That's probably kind of true. There are plenty of them understand this. Day to day, we just don't even twig to this. So I'll give you a quick definition of each of these and a quick explanation. So a feature. A feature is an attribute or an element of your offer. So they're going to be some things that you've got in your proposition, and they are going to be attributes or facts. So that's a feature. I would suggest that in this instance, you focus largely on the unique or what you think are the relatively unique attributes. If you think that it's going to benefit the economy, you just go, really? Is anybody going to put up a proposition that's going to retard the economy? Right? Is anybody going to put up something that creates less work in the hunter? Right? So talk about the stuff. Again, by the time you fill it out, if you cover everything, back to the document, cover everything, you can fill 30 minutes really easily. But if you leave all the non-unique stuff out, people will start to say, hey, I can remember because this was the stuff that was different, it stood out. So if that's an attribute or a feature, then to translate that to a benefit, you will have heard of the term WIFM. What is in it for me? Or what does that mean to the customer? In this case, the customer you could think of as the judges. I'd be thinking about it as the punters that live in the hunter and want to be raising their kids and living in the hunter in 2037. I reckon that's the end game. So how is that going to improve the life of the folks living in this part of the world? And if you keep asking that question, a bit simplistic, but there are 3 reasons or benefits that people look for. Really simple. Money. Will it make me or save me money? Ego. In the broadest sense of ego, so the whole wide interpretation, fear, confidence, trust, anxiety, all of those schools. Is that going to make me feel better about myself? And then the last one is time. So there's 2 rational pieces there. Is it going to make me or save me money, make me or save me time, and is it going to make me feel better about my place in life? So what are the couple of features or attributes that are relatively unique? What does that then mean in terms of improving life for the folks living in the Hunter around those areas of, you know, time, emotion, ego and money? And so then evidence. Almost a legal definition of evidence. Evidence is anything that supports your case. So if you think about anything that supports your case, must it be true? Nope. Expert testimony. You'll see expert testimony from the same person in two different cases within a year of each other, and it will be diametrically opposed. It's admitted as expert. How they live with themselves is their problem, right? But it doesn't have to be true. On the flip side, I'm not promoting the idea that you lie at all. So examples of evidence, case study, testimonials. My favourite, statistics. Because if you try to prove anything to me and use statistics, I did say I'm not that mathematically smart. Ben Disraeli, lies, damn lies, statistics. I can prove that black is white using mathematics. I'm not sure I can, but I just don't trust maths. Clearly my engineering DNA is screaming out. So there's a whole bunch of, if you think about all the case studies, all the testimonials, all the stats, hypotheticals, hypotheses, that's a lot of information. So proof is the right subset. So it's the right amount. Some people want a lot of evidence, some want a little. You've only got 30 minutes, so pick your evidence carefully. And you don't, some people are going to need lots of depth of data, but you can still give them one example where there's lots of substantive data sitting in there. So it's the right amount of the right type of evidence. Don't use stats with me. So there'll be people in there that are going to want to see images. If you think about your topic's about passion and aspiration and the future, right? So it's the right amount of the right type of evidence to support the decision. If you like to think about shorthand, just think about the examples and the benefits and the facts that you're going to be pointing to. That's in some ways a good way to think about it. The other thing that I'd give you, make it a sort of quite a specific suggestion on is think about how you use visuals to persuade, if that makes sense. So you will stand there and you'll be talking about something, but graphs as an example. Really, really hard. Not everybody's been to MBA school. I'm colourblind. What's the split? We've got 3 men, 2 women. There's at least 1.5 men in that room are going to be colourblind. Keep the message simple. Do I feel like a dill when someone says, oh, you can see it? Yeah, just even if you're doing one of those things, I can't see the little red flashing light. So whatever you're doing, make sure that it's really easy for people to digest. That's persuasion. Quick questions or comments? Yep.
Sorry, is the left rational and the right emotional?
There's kind of, it's. I think I understand the question. There is a pretty strong correlation between, in that you would talk about features and tangible outcomes.
Yeah.
So you talk about attributes and you talk about hard concrete outcomes. Over here you would talk about softer features, such as, I'll make people feel good about the prospects in the Hunter. But you'd also talk there about quality of lifestyle, hope, aspiration, and there talk about arguably the political repositioning, the demographic repositioning of the Hunter as a Silicon Hub, or whatever you want to call it. There's absolutely a correlation. You start looking at the people, what's driving them, and then the message. Say it's a pretty simple game of chess. And there goes the strategy piece. Quick other questions on that? Question for Ian. Mate, what Q&A? What's in the final presentations? Is there a Q&A allocation?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Right. Okay.
That's after the 30 minutes.
Yeah, so it's 30 plus 10. Okay. So without telling you what to do, I reckon you run presentation, you're working on 20 minutes. 25 max, because it'll top out at 30 minutes. And you don't want to be, tip for those that weren't, it's just not very important, is it? So let me spend, if it'd help, let me spend a few minutes on questions.
Sorry.
Yes.
Say we went practicing, we were down at 22 minutes and we got in there and it did go for 22 minutes. Are we going to get marked down?
No, there's not a country, not an audience in the world ever that will punish you for saving their time, firstly, and having a crisp message. Yeah. It doesn't look like, it doesn't mean like you get an 80% mark automatically. No, unless anybody else has ever seen anything. But by the same score, if you keep your message well ordered, crisp, simple, then most clients, because and maybe it's different elsewhere, but in engineering, there's the topic we're going on to, there's this abhorrence of the idea of questions, because they'll find me out. And so people sit there and they just shut out the whole, questions aren't going to happen. It's not going to happen. And what it does do is put out a vibe to the client that says, you know what, we aren't interested and we're not listening. And so to that point, I would suggest to you that the other thing is interaction. And if you start with 20 minutes and you tell them at the front, this runs to 20 minutes. So should you have questions, are we going to tell the client that they can't ask questions? I don't know, I kind of get a bit hacked off when I hear people telling me what I can and can't do when I'm arguing with the client. And so, we've got, our message is actually pretty crisp. And if you had some questions as we go, we'd love to have them. The knack there is for you to manage that timing, because it goes back to it. You don't want to miss out on wrapping up your entire presentation. But again, that's where do you put the control? You put the control in the hands of the audience, carefully. Other quick questions? Okay, look, with visual aids, I could bang on about that forever. If you're going to have them, they must have a purpose. Have few. There's an old metric of 1 visual per 2 minutes. You got 25 minutes, 8 or 10 images. That's it. Keep it simple. And I'd suggest you keep them dumb. Keep them dumb, because what can go wrong will go wrong. Okay, let me spend, I'll touch on two. One is asking questions. This is maybe not that relevant, but this is business leadership stuff, probably, rather than the context. So I guess the first one is, people recognise that you've actually got, so what I'm trying to say, high value contribution to your clients will be the quality of the questions you ask. And that, I don't care whether you're in logistics, manufacturing or professional services. People that come in and ask really good high gain questions, people say, well, that person knows what they're talking about. So asking questions that are good quality is really important. What this is trying to depict here is there's something, last count, there's about 25 different styles of questions. There are two here, closed and open-ended questions. Most of you will have heard that terminology. The good thing about closed questions, they give you definition of data, but they don't encourage people to express and to talk openly. Open questions express and get people to engage. So a closed-end question might be something like, so does that comply with the Australian Code? What it's really saying is it's either a yes or it's no. How many, how much, when? Then down here is, explain to me the way your organisation goes about X. Shut the mouth and just let them talk. Tell me more. Great open question. So the point about it is, if that dot, whatever colour it is a piece of information, a budget, a time frame, an existing supplier's name, a particular design preference they might have, then your trouble with questions is you can't control the answer. But you can plan the questions that you might answer in a sequence that takes you from very broad to a specific piece of information. So I would go into this with 1 or 2 questions you might ask of the audience, so that when you finish early, and they've got no questions. Would it be nice to ask them a question? Maybe even at the beginning. Let me finish with answering questions. You will get questions asked of you. Really simple 5-step piece. First one is, you hear the question as your ears hear it, but you're under stress, it's the back end of a presentation, you're mashing yourself up because you've screwed it up, you're not hearing what they're saying. The other flip side is most clients don't know what they actually mean. They don't express it terribly well. They've got it sort of, and they go, So clarify the question, so feed it back. So I guess what you're really talking about here is this, is that right? And you'll see them go, oh, okay, so talk a little more. Context, put it in the context. So we're here talking about the future of the hunter. So let them know that you're smart enough to be able to connect that question with what we hear about. Because that obviously is going to have a direct impact on jobs, as an example of foreign investment. Communicate the detailed answer. I call it case study, but have a stat or something. And you say, look, it's pretty similar to what we'd plan to do with the Port of Newcastle, as an example. And they go, oh, okay, I get that. And the last one is, check that you've actually answered the question. And most people, when they get to that point, they go, these folks are authentic, they're serious. Because most people try and skunk out, right? And show backbone, even if you don't know. Just look the devil in the eye and just say, has that answered the question? And if they say no, start again. But in terms of backbone and sincerity, you'll get big scores. And most of the time, there's what's the engineering expression? Don't ask a question you don't know the answer to. That is the most foolish statement I've ever heard. Ask a question you don't know the answer to. And encourage the client to ask you questions you don't know the answer to. Because I'll see you thinking and working as a team, and in this stuff, again, that'll get big marks. I reckon that's probably it, folks. My suggestion to you would be appoint a person to start fleshing this now. In parallel, while you're drafting your document. That'd be my first suggestion. The second one is start doing, and if they do nothing more, then start building a draft bio, a ghost bio on the 5 judges. Try and fill them, populate them on those quadrants, and try and get into understanding their drivers. That makes sense. And if you got that done, and then you can dust it off and just pick up the structure piece, the day that, because your document will be done, bar the shouting, will be done 2 days before. You got to print the thing, get it PDF, and all that sort of jazz. I'll stop there. Questions or comments any of you have got on anything that I've covered?
Do you have a strategy for, if there's a question that's asked and you really don't have an answer, what do you do?
Just lie. No, it's...
Can you take it on notice?
yeah, well, that's really what you're saying. Because people fudge. And when you're fudging, they smell blood. Yeah. And then the second one comes, and after that, you're dead. Yeah. So I just say, look, let me suggest to you, this is the way I'd go about addressing that question, i.e., we have Fred. Fred's the gun in that area. I know that we addressed something similar to that on our last job at Liddell Power Station. I'd be happy to get back to you. Yeah. Yep. And the other thing is, you're not supposed to know everything. Yeah. Right? So do you lie, do you guess? Oh, right. So is that what I'm going to get when you do whatever it is that your planning piece? Are you guessing with your planning? Because that's the metaphor. Other quick questions? Probably the best way, and I can't remember the dates, and I've got if you folks just wanted to coordinate, over time I've generally spent and done a first rehearsal, second rehearsal with you. It's a decision for you and your mentors, but if you want me to, I'll happily, I'm not based here, but I'd certainly come up here and probably mean trying to coordinate, do it on a particular day or a couple of days. But if that worked for you, I'd be happy to help. All done, guys. Go well and enjoy the next couple of weeks. Game on.